all, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Tom Cox. Tom has had a varied career as a writer and has literally walked a winding path to reach his current point. He's got a new book out. It's called Everything Will Swallow You. We discuss why his genre can really only be defined as a Tom Cox novel. Also why he gave up writing as a journalist and wanted to forge his own way.
Just truly following my path and just sitting down and just going, well, I'm going to write the stuff that really pleases me, the stuff that really, the kind of world I really want to live inside. And it's a weirder world. And so it felt like a big break. And that came in 2015. And that was when I gave up journalism. And I just said, I'm banning myself from ever writing another piece of journalism. I'm never going to write anything for a national newspaper or a national magazine again. I'm doing it all for myself on my website or in my books.
And you can hear the rule that he always keeps in mind when he's editing.
And you're always thinking, how can I say what I'm trying to say in the clearest, best way possible? Even if that what you're trying to say is really complex, you're still trying to go for that clarity. And my pursuit of that I've become much more hard on myself in the pursuit of that.
It's all on the way with Tom Cox in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show then. My name's Dan. This is Writer's Routine. It's a day in the life of the world's most successful authors. What do they do? How do they plan everything? How do they sort out their day to give themselves the best chance of getting words down? And where are they when they get their words down? This week, we're with Tom Cox. Tom has had a 25-year-long writing career, published 15 books, and the things that he writes are varied and then some, I would say. Golf memoirs, nature memoirs, and the most creative stories that you could invent. He's a Sunday Times Bestseller. He won a Shirley Jackson Horror Writing Award, was longlisted for the Wainwright Prize. He's said to have one of the most fabulous and anarchic imaginations in literature. I think it's a good description. That's what you'd like, to have a fabulous and anarchic imagination. He was the Guardian's youngest ever music critic, a record dealer as well, a journalist for a national newspaper. He was behind the internet sensation My Sad Cat that you might have spotted a few years ago. He wrote the 21st Century Yokel column and then decided to go his own way. And after banning himself from writing journalism for someone else, he did it on his own space. And this was before Substack, before subscription-powered newsletters became an accepted part of digital culture, really. He did it on his own blog, crowdfunded a book which did very well very quickly. And now, after a shaky situation, which you'll hear all about, he's back with a traditional publisher and a new novel. It's called Everything Will Swallow You. It's the story of Eric and his confidant Carl, who have been inseparable for 21 years. Their friendship is the only constant thing in a changing world. Only Carl's true nature is something that you wouldn't believe. It's a book that blends folklore, magical realism, and music. And you can hear all about it. We discuss the crowdfunding, also how he remembers to keep it fun and the moment that he realised it would stop being that. We talk about why parts of his career have brought out the worst of social media and why so much of his inspiration comes from walking. There's some fruity language in there, in case you're listening in the car with kids or whatever. But there's a lot to take away. A really inspiring story, I think. And we dive into it, as we always do, with Tom Cox and what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
Well, it kind of varies because I should be writing in my office most of the time, but I find it a bit too sort of dark. So that's kind of the problem, what I can see, because I can basically just see an overgrown bush out the window, which makes the room very dark. So I tend to be a little bit itinerant with my writing routine, and I often end up in the kitchen, which is lovely and light, and and I can see in the distance Killerton House, the National Trust place, which often at this time of year in the morning looks really lovely in the mist. Sorry, my cat's just having a little coughing fit next to me. I don't know if you can hear that.
I can. Are they all right?
Yeah, he's all right. It's his thing, Jim. He's a huge ginger cat, and he never coughs up a hairball, but looks like he's kind of threatening to do it at various points, and then he's just fine again.
Yeah, my cat does a similar thing when she's not just sleeping. So you can see Killerton House in behind you in the kitchen. So if you're moving around, if you're working quite itinerantly, what is there that kind of comes with you no matter where you're working? Is it just you and a laptop?
It depends what I'm writing, really. I mean, sometimes it will be my laptop and also like my notebook normally, which isn't as full as it should be at the moment. I'm pretty good at taking notes, and a lot of them are taken like on my walks. I seem to get a lot of my best ideas for stories and characters and landscape and things on my walks. So that'll go in my notebook. My notebook comes with me with the laptop, and sometimes I'll have like a little pile of, I don't know, like old folklore books or old books about topography, because I'm often, with my novels, I'm often kind of nicking little bits from those or just getting inspired by bits and bobs from those kind of books.
So you said that you should be working in an office. What, if you were working in the office, apart from when it's dark, what is there around you in there that's kind of set up to help you write it, in an office type environment?
Well, at the moment, I've got a picture of Moby Grape, who are one of my favourite psychedelic bands from the 60s, and Moby Grape kind of looking at me and telling me to write something kind of wild and far out and psychedelic and brave, as they did with their first couple of albums, actually with their first 4 or 5 really, but particularly the first 2. So I've got that, and then I've got like, I don't have fiction books in my office, even though like I'm a big fiction reader. Fiction's my main thing really as a reader, but I've got kind of reference books, which will often be things like stuff about old folklore or like shell guides to the counties, like the old mid-century shell guides. There's lots of interesting things in those. And then I don't have it anymore, but I think just because I've moved so many times, I think the bit of paper that I wrote it on got a bit torn and dog-eared. But I used to have a Fairport Convention quote on the wall, which was to kind of remind me of something, which was, it's a quote from, I think, Come Ye, or is it Come All Ye? Anyway, it's the first song on their most famous album, Lief and Liege, which is, and there's a quote from that song, which is, "The fiddler, he just loves to play. That's why he plays so well." And it's like, it used to be like a reminder to myself to sort of keep it fun. Like, if I keep it fun, then the book will be good. That's kind of my philosophy, because it didn't always used to be fun in the early days. I kind of lost sight of that at one point.
You mentioned it not being fun, and often we find ourselves kind of slipping into these patterns where you're almost doing it for the sake of it, or you've lost sight. What do you remember about the moment where you realised, oh, hang on, I've kind of lost track of why I'm doing this. I do need to bring the fun.
Well, I think this is quite a long story, really, because there was a significant moment in my career where my approach to books changed. So I was a journalist for many years, and I had good jobs in that time. I mean, particularly for my age and for my education, which wasn't very good, really. I had didn't have any GCSEs at above C, didn't have any A levels, didn't have a degree. But when I was 23, just before my 24th birthday, I got offered the job as the Guardian's chief music critic, which just seems nuts now looking back at it. And it's a great job, dream job. And being a journalist, I think, was very good for me for a while. And I got it taught me lots of disciplines, working to deadline, making sure things make sense. But I never really wanted to sort of ultimately be a journalist. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to write novels and fiction. And my first books were very sort of obedient and journalistic. And it was me kind of listening to a lot of people who were better educated than me, more confident than me, I suppose, because of that education, more confident about their opinions, about what would work as books. And I listened to that. I thought they know best. So I was more like, with my early books, I suppose I was more trying to please those sort of people. But I always felt like I wasn't quite right in the books that I really wanted to write. But I didn't have any kind of confidence that people would take, publishers would take those books. They were the kind of books I wanted to read and write. And I did sort of think there are people out there who would read these, but I sort of felt it was a bit too brave at that point. But then I got to 40, and I think that was the point where I just went, I've got to break away and really do what I really want. Because I tried to write short stories and things in my free time, aside from the books that had been commissioned and the journalism. And I'd just seen a way that I could do something which was a bit more just truly following my path and just sitting down and just going, well, I'm going to write the stuff that really pleases me, the stuff that really, it's the kind of world I really want to live inside. And it's a weirder world. And so it felt like a big break. And that came in 2015. And that was when I gave up journalism. And I just said, I'm banning myself from ever writing another piece of journalism. I'm never going to write anything for a national newspaper or a national magazine again. I'm doing it all for myself on my website or in my books. And there was just a new freedom that came with that. And since then, it has been fun. And I think that's why perhaps I don't have that reminder on my wall. But you still need it from time to time, I think, because you've always got to keep it fun. And as soon as you start sort of falling into the trap of thinking, what will sell? What do people want at the moment? That feels like death to creativity for me.
Is there any part of you that is frustrated that you didn't kind of make that discovery a little earlier on in your life?
There is definitely that part of me, but it's a very, very complex thing, because by saying that, I'm kind of saying to myself that I was the same person then that I am now. And that's patently not true, because you learn to have the bravery to make those decisions. And because your ability has changed, because of all the times you've failed to make that decision and all the stuff you've done that hasn't quite worked or that you're not quite as fully proud of, all the little failures, they all accumulate into something that makes you realize what works. So in a way, I mean, I always talk about this with my early attempts at fiction, even though they're like potentially exciting, they didn't work. I mean, I'd get to sort of, so I finally wrote my first novel. I started it when I was 44 and I'm 50 now. And it came out, when did it come out? Just before my 47th birthday. And I really, really felt good about what I was writing, and I was trying to write that book as early as like 15, 20 years before that. And I'd walk away from it after 20,000 odd words and say to myself, oh, it's so annoying that I can't write this because I've got to write my journalism to pay the rent and that's getting in the way, or I need to write this other book. And the novel, the fiction writing felt sort of frivolous and just like something I was doing for fun, and I was frustrated that no one had let me do it. But looking back, I actually didn't believe in it. I didn't believe in the characters, and I had not found my voice. I had the taste of what I wanted to do. That was quite clear, but I didn't have the ability to really write the book that I wanted to write. So part of me, I can say, oh, how annoying that I wasn't one of those people who comes out and writes a great novel, like, you know, in their late 20s or their 30s. But I just wasn't there. I just have to face the fact I just was not good enough. And it took me a long time to get good enough. And I finally did. I finally got to the point where I was like, oh, I can actually do what I wanted to do.
Does that, on the positive side, does that experience and learning that perhaps you're not ready for things at certain times of your life, does it make you more optimistic about what the future holds, that perhaps there's even different parts of your writing career that you're not ready for and that you will be in maybe 5 or 10 years?
I hope so. I mean, I notice that a lot of my favourite writers these days, like talking about favourite kind of living writers anyway, they seem to really hit their stride in their 50s and 60s these days. As my template when I was growing up and becoming a writer, I was always thinking of those writers who are like, they're really outliers. That people like Donna Tartt or Philip Roth or John Updike, people who wrote these famous award-winning, timeless books that people are still reading now, who wrote them in their 20s. And they're just not the norm, really. And I think one of the good things there's lots of bad things about picking a career as a writer, particularly on the kind of financial security side of things. But one of the very good things is the sort of longevity. I mean, you can sort of, if everything goes okay, you can kind of keep doing it, you know, until you can't anymore just as a result of a case of extreme death, really. Like, apart from that, like, as long as you can still see and think and get to your keyboard, the idea is that you just keep going at it. And I feel that I have, particularly since my mid-40s, I feel like all of a sudden the future just feels really exciting in terms of the actual creative side. The thing that is scary is the kind of like, how do you get the books out there, with the way the world's changing, with AI, with the trends in the publishing industry, when you're doing something a bit weird. That's the scary bit. But when I just think about the creative side of it, I'm so excited. And I think, God, I mean, thank God I didn't like choose a career as a professional sports person or something like that, where you're kind of done at 30.
We'll talk about the day, or your current day, in just a second. But just to touch on that moment again, when you were 40, when you decided, right, I'm never writing a piece of journalism again, you're wildly leaping into the unknown. It must be absolutely terrifying. What did the first day of your new, without journalism, writing career look like? Was it just a case of you, right, I need to get the words down, let's sit there and see what happens?
No, it was really noisy and scary and weird, because I saw the absolute worst side of social media. Because what happened was, I'd been writing this column for The Guardian about countryside and beyond. I suppose it was a way to try and write about nature, social history, folklore, and some more personal stuff, I suppose. And it was called 21st Century Yokel. And this was before newspapers like The Guardian suddenly decided, hey, nature writing's really trendy. We need lots of columns about nature in the countryside. And it was very marginalised, and they'd wanted to sort of to bin it, I think, for a while, even though I knew that it had a following. They were trying to dress it up as a way. They were trying to dress my writing up with headlines that appealed to people who didn't know much about countryside. It was very directed at like middle-class people who live in Islington, it felt like to me. And they'd halved my pay for it. And then I had a disagreement with them about some subbing errors that had been added to my copy, and the way they were the headlines they were putting on. And we sort of reached a mutual agreement that it couldn't go on. And I wrote about this quite honestly on my website, because I wanted to inform my readers about why it wasn't there anymore. And I wrote it's quite a long piece because it felt like a complicated explanation that was needed, which was also like, I'm not having a go at the subs at The Guardian. They're quite poorly paid, understaffed. And I wanted to get all sides of it there and the complexity of it, but also be honest about things like, oh, you know, they keep forgetting to pay me and things like that. So I wrote that, but it got shared a lot on Twitter. And before I knew it, a lot of people were picking screenshots out of it and sharing them, and no one reading the full article, or certainly like kind of 70% of people not reading the full article, but putting these really out of context screenshots about it and kind of having a go at me about it. And I sort of thought, oh, you know, social media is really fucking evil, because when you sort of see that side of it, but then the people who'd read it properly understood what I was saying. And so I thought that made it, like, in a way, even more scary going out on my own, because I was saying, like, okay, I'm coming off the back of a best-selling book fairly recently after that, so I've got that level of security. But I was also writing a new book that I knew that publisher wouldn't want to take because it was much weirder, and I wasn't sure how the book was going to come out at that point. It felt like I'm going into the wilderness, I'm just writing it. And then I'm also putting this stuff on my website and I'm saying it's there for free, but if you want to support me, you can put a little donation through. You can donate £1 a month or something to my writing. And I knew I had a following, so that made it less scary. And I knew there were some people who were going to do it. And it did work out quite well. But I think that the context of it, it's like, this is 2015, so it's like a pre-Substack era, when that's not a normal thing to do, to sort of ask people for money for your writing directly. So that was definitely, that made it a scary thing to do. And I thought I'd then have to go out and search for another job as well. But it somehow I've kind of managed to keep it going ever since.
You then get books crowdfunded, right? You go the Unbound route, which is, and there are so many people that will be listening who will be interested in the idea of self-publishing, but to do it in your way, by crowdfunding novels, well, books, that's a really innovative path towards it. Getting that surge of pledges and sponsorship, I guess you can call it, I mean, that must have given you a boost.
It definitely gave me a boost. I mean, that's a really checkered story, the crowdfunding thing, because I'm not doing that anymore. Because in the end, it kind of all turned to crap, I suppose you might say. I mean, Unbound folded, and they folded owing authors huge amount of money, huge amount of unpaid royalties, unpaid advances, including me. You know, that this is what's happened this year, which has been very, very kind of devastating in some ways. But at the time, it felt like such a kind of brave new world, really, a different way of doing things. Because with that weird book that I've just mentioned, which is called 21st Century Yokel, I'd written about 80 or 90% of it. And I knew that if I'd taken that to most conventional publishers, they would have asked me to change it and make it into a more conventional book. But I sort of wanted to do a book that was lots of genres rolled into one, like humour, family memoir, social history, folkloric tales, walking, wildlife, all of that. And also not a book with a big obvious beginning, middle and end, not one of those nature books where you're like, I was really sad, but then I met this trout that I got on really well with, and that showed me the beauty of the world. And then I'm really happy at the end of the book because of that, because that's sort of the narrative that a lot of publishers wanted to push you into. And you can see it with books like The Salt Path, like that became the sort of trend, and publishers really wanted those books. And I heard about Unbound, and it was more like, well, okay, you don't get an advance, but if you can find the people to publish the book, to fund the book, and get it to 100%, you don't get any of that money. That 100%, that's just Unbound get the money to get the book into print and into shops. But after that, in theory, you have a 50-50 royalty deal, which is much better than most publishers. So it's all about whether you've got that support. And I was lucky that that I had it because of that writing on my website that I was working so hard on in the year and a bit before that, and I'd done so much of it. I got this groundswell of support, and the book funded in 7 hours flat. And I thought, great, and I get a lovely, lovely cover art on it. And I thought, here we go. So eventually, I wrote 7 books in total for Unbound, with using that same method. I know, because I know myself quite well, that I have this energetic, I suppose, mentally energetic time of the day, where I've got this energy, and I need to bottle it, and it's important. And that is really, I need to get up really somewhere between 5:30 and 7 a.m. and I need to be at my desk or the kitchen table, as it often is, with a large cup of coffee and get motoring, because that's when I'll do my best writing. So I do try to stick to that. And then, sometimes I can do a whole day's writing in that between then and lunchtime, and then I can go out in the afternoon and go and do like a 10-mile walk somewhere and get a load more ideas, and then I'll come back and do a bit of editing. But the bit that I'll avoid as writing time, that's the bit that we're in just now, especially between like 2 and 5. But really, any time between lunchtime and early evening, I'm no good. It's mostly drivel if I try to write. It's just, my mind's just not very sharp. It gets a bit better again in the evening. So if I'm working really hard on a book, I'll do some in the evening as well. But it's got to be that morning bit, and that, because that can sometimes be really productive. And I'm quite fast when I get going in that morning bit, if I'm in the thick of a book and thinking really well.
When you get there at a time between 5:30 and 7, that's still quite like a wide range. What determines when you'll sit down? Is it something that's happened the day before? Is it when you can be bothered to set your alarm for?
I mean, it's a bit different if I've been out to the pub with some mates the night before or something. It might be a bit later, I guess. I'm not a night owl. I go to bed quite early, so I'm pretty good at getting up. But I would say the time of year affects it as well. I mean, I think in the height of summer, like if you're talking about around June, I will be up at even 5 some of the time. Some of the time I'll be up and writing at 5, but I'll definitely be at my desk by 6 on a good day during then. But winter, it's a bit harder. Winter, you feel a bit more like hibernating, which is frustrating, because actually, if I had my way and I could somehow make it work, I would write a novel every winter, late autumn, winter, early spring, and I take the rest of the year off. But that's not realistic.
But the thing is, Tom, it could be, right? You've chosen this path, that you're not writing journalism again because you want it your way. So why can't it be that?
I think because I am not in a position where I can sustain a living just from my books. I'd love it if I was. I mean, you're always hoping this thing will change where you suddenly start to get some foreign rights, or I don't know, your books just start getting shoved into shops in bigger numbers, and then it becomes there. But it's because I really work very hard on what is now what I think of as my newsletter, except it's not really a load of news. It's just a piece of writing that goes into people's inboxes pretty much every week. And I'm working hard on that. I don't think I'd stop working hard on that, but I think over the last few years I've really, really pushed it. Like, I wrote 3 novels in 3 years, which it's quite big, that, or just over 3 years, I think, 3 novels. But some people take 5 years to write a novel, so I kind of really wore myself out. But I thought, that's what I've got to do to make this a sustainable living, really. And so I just went for it.
You said that sometimes you'll be able to get an entire day's worth of writing in just a few hours, in just the morning. What is an entire day's worth of writing? What are you aiming for? Is it just a point of you being happy?
I think it is, yeah. I mean, it could kind of go on forever. It depends what juncture you're at in the narrative. I mean, I've written 4,000 words in a day before, but I do find like if you do that, you sort of the amount of editing that needs, and you will go over the last bit, and you'll see that you've started to get a bit more sloppy. So I think anything between 1,000 and 2,000, that feels like a really nice day's work to me. I know this really varies. I mean, I spoke to my friend John the other day, who's a writer, and he said he thought that was a lot, but then, I mean, Barbara Cartland probably wouldn't have. I mean, what did she write about 10,000 words in a day or something, didn't she? And then I think Ian McEwan only writes about 500 words in a day. So it does vary. And sometimes I'll be at a really tricky point, like, not that my books are very plot heavy, but the shape of the narrative and the twists and the turns are sometimes quite complex, particularly in the last one, which is called Everything Will Swallow You, that came out last month. I think if it's a very tricky bit where you're trying to transfer to a sort of new thread and it makes your brain hurt a bit, sometimes you've done 400 words in a morning, and you're happy with that because it was just such a difficult bit, and you've successfully solved a problem within that 400 words.
When people are writing, I guess, fewer words than 1,000, it's sometimes because they're trying to make them as perfect as they can be first time round. What's your view on that? How perfect does it need to be on first draft?
I'm an absolute bastard to myself constantly. I'm being a real perfectionist about it. And then once I think Kurt Vonnegut once said something about this, which was, I can't remember the terms he used, but he separated writers into these two categories, and one he called something like a basher and another one like a slugger. And I suppose it was like the idea that some people just really fly at it, and then all the rest happens in the editing process. And then other people, they're very slowly like trying to get everything right the first time. But I don't think it's as simple as that. And I think I'm somewhere between the two, because I'm fussing with it all the time. But then my editing process on top of that has become much more brutal. And I think that's part of the transfer, again, from journalism to books. Because in journalism, it's like you get an editor, and really what they want from you, it's great if you write something really, really special. But really, they're not. A lot of the time, they're not asking you for something really special or unique. They've got 1,000 word space, for example, to fill, and they want everything to make sense. And that's really what you're doing. And they want you to get it in by deadline. That's the most important thing. Whereas with a book, you're really like chiseling away, and you're always thinking, how can I say what I'm trying to say in the clearest, best way possible? Even if that what you're trying to say is really complex, you're still trying to go for that clarity. And my pursuit of that I've become much more hard on myself in the pursuit of that, as a result, I think, partly of another pivotal moment in my career, which is way back before I gave up journalism, when I just had my first very harsh editor on a book. And he sort of upset me at the time, but it was so good for me. It just made me realise you've got to tighten the screws more. You've got to be harsher than you were being.
We all know that. I've never had a book published, and I know that you need to be as tight as possible. What was this editor or saying, or what was the manner in which they were saying it that really, really rammed that home for you?
Well, it was a combination of things that he said and maybe realisations I was having about my writing. So I wrote two non-fiction books about golf, which I'm still quite proud of. I mean, I could pick holes in them all day now, probably, but for the time, I think I was really happy with them. And the second one, particularly, I handed it in around Christmas 2006, New Year's 2007, feeling it's the best thing I'd ever written. And then this guy at Random House's old sports arm of publishing, Yellow Jersey, he's called Tristan Jones. He sent me the manuscript back, and it had marks all over it in his very beautiful old school handwriting. And I couldn't cope with having that many questions and criticisms. I didn't look at it properly. I just glanced at all of these questions and things on it, put it in a drawer, came back 5 days later, felt a bit more clear-headed about it, started to look at it and think, okay, that's reasonable. That's just a suggestion. It's not, I don't have to take on board everything he said. Some of it's up for discussion, and some of it he's perhaps saying to me, you don't need this. Chop this bit out. And what I was also realizing, which again only comes through trial and error, is that I think I had a tendency to try and put too many jokes in my books rather than let the jokes breathe naturally. Like, just almost everything had to be just constantly funny, whereas things are sometimes more funny because you have a break from the jokes. And I think I was realizing that at the same time, but it's just this extra level that you can look at everything and still go, no, you can still pick that apart and say that in a much clearer, nicer way. And then you start to get really into the editing process, and you start to just love picking a sentence apart, which, I mean, you sort of wonder, is anyone really going to appreciate this? Is it going to make that much difference? But it makes a difference to me and the pride that I feel in what I do. So I feel that it is worthwhile.
We'll get more from Tom in just a second. If you're enjoying the show, if you've learned anything along the way, maybe Tom's story has inspired you to go it your own way, given you ideas on how you can plan things, I don't know, but you can support us. More or less every week, I bring you chats with the biggest authors around, and you can help that carry on for just a few dollars a month by becoming a backer over on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/writers routine. On there, you get merch, there is bonus content, and there is even a way for your book to sponsor this show. So that's on our Patreon. That's for an every month deal, rolling backing for as long or as short as you want. Absolutely fine. It goes a really long way. Or you can become a one and done. You don't really need to sign up for anything. You just send over a tip or a donation, just a one-off show of support, and it goes to a lot of use, I promise. That's on Ko-Fi. It helps me bring you these chats as often as I can. And if you'd like to support us on Patreon or on our Ko-Fi page, you can find links in the episode notes or wherever you're listening. Let's get back to it then, chatting with Tom Cox about his new novel, Everything Will Swallow You. We talk about why writing for himself means that more people love his books, but more people hate them too. Also, how his inspiration comes from walking and random first lines. And we get back to it, chatting about stripping it down. We heard about that a moment ago. It's all about clarity. How can Tom write this in the simplest and best possible way? Is there a flip side though? Is he ever worried that it'll become so tight he'll lose the joy around it? He'll lose his voice and the special things about his novels that make them unique?
I don't ever feel in danger of doing that, because I think it's more in pursuit of me really just being more me, I suppose, in it. And but if you've got an idea of really what you want to say, and I always feel like I have when I'm writing, then it's really the pursuit of that. And I think what's happened with my books is that my agent said to me the other day that your voice is there right from the start, right from your first book. I'm not sure if I totally agree with that, but obviously there was some unique aspect to it then, but I feel like that's got much more distilled. And And as it's got more distilled, it's not actually got more stripped down. It's more like there are more ideas in the book, but hopefully I'm expressing them more clearly. But I do notice, like, as I'm going on and being more stubbornly writing my own sort of thing, I'm noticing there's a bigger chasm between the people who hate my books and the people who love them. I feel like both emotions seem to be much more extreme, and that is because I feel that's because I give less of a shit and I will write for me primarily. I'm not trying to please the lowest common denominator. I'm not trying to simplify things in that way. I'm not trying to be in every voice. Books aren't for everyone. I'm very happy to offend people with some of my books because then they're not written for those people.
Just before we talk more about the new book, you mentioned the failings of Unbound, and now you've moved to Swift Press, right? How easy a changeover was that? I mean, because you've got a body of work behind you, because you've been known as a journalist and then been known with some successful novels, was it quite easy just to land upon a new publisher?
Absolutely not. No, I feel very fortunate that it's happened because I've seen other Unbound authors that it's not happened to, and I've talked to them, and I've seen the stress the stress we've all had really over the last year and a bit. And I mean, I feel like I've certainly lost a year of my life in terms of book writing. I've kept up my other writing very regularly, but the mess that I've had to clear up because of this publisher, and I suppose the way it overextended itself and also told us untruths about what was going on, it's swallowed. I mean, I always think about that, how ironic it is that I've got a book that's come out 6 months too late, that they were supposed to come out, that's called Everything Will Swallow You, whilst this situation has been swallowing something of my life. But I was lucky in the sense that I didn't have to go out and look for another publisher, because Swift saw what was happening, and they saw me talking about what was happening in the bookseller, and very quickly got hold of a manuscript of Everything Will Swallow You. Obviously, they must have liked it, and they said to my agent, are you thinking of kind of transferring Tom at this point? And that was at the point when I reverted my rights just before Unbound went into administration, right at the 11th hour. That was an enormously stressful thing to do. It's been absolute carnage, but all I can sort of say is that I'm just really lucky that this book exists, and it's come out of it, and it's in the hands of my readers with a lovely cover on it. And now I'm really starting to rebuild and get on track, and I should be, getting deep into the next book, which really I would have been getting deep into this time last year if all this hadn't have kicked off.
Let's talk about Everything Will Swallow You then. This is Eric and it's Carl. Just tell us about the very first moment that the idea for this story came into your head. What was the seed that spawned the tree?
Well, it was on a walk again, which is, I mean, all of the best stories come to me on walks, and sometimes I just don't know why it's come into my head. I feel like I go back to my 7-year-old brain in a way, and this is sort of a bit what my previous novel 1983 is about, because that's a very autobiographical novel, kind of taking elements of my life as a 7-year-old. But I'd go on walks with my mum and dad, and I'd be sort of pretending that I wasn't enjoying the walk. We'd be walking in Derbyshire near where we lived, because we lived in North Nottinghamshire, and we'd go over the border into slightly more interesting walking territory. But I'd be kind of lagging behind my mum and dad, but in my head telling myself stories about all the this parallel countryside, which was, I don't know, populated by mythical beasts, ghosts. I'd be fighting orcs and things like that, and it's that kind of imagination. In a way, it's still there when I'm on a walk. So I'm sort of always looking for this parallel world that I want to set stories in. That's a bit like this world, but it has more magical elements. So this is a prime example of that. I'm walking along footpath high above Chesil Beach in West Dorset, probably this time 3 years ago. And I looked down onto the beach and there was a guy just sitting there. It's quite a cold, grey day. And I just thought, so what if that guy's sitting there and a creature that looks a little bit like a dog crawls out of the sea and sits next to him? What's the story behind that? Discuss in 110,000 words. And so I just took that and ran with it. But I didn't actually write the book at that point. I decided to do my other novel, the middle novel, 1983, first. It felt like a simpler story. And I also wanted to live with, let the idea of Everything Will Swallow You for memoir do more walks in the landscape I was going to set it in, and let the landscape tell the story to me. So I gave it a bit longer, and I did that first, and then I realised what this creature was. I realised the identity of the guy on the beach, who's this record dealer called Eric, and he deals in records and antiques, and used to be in a psychedelic band in the late 60s, early 70s. And then Carl is his companion, his faithful companion, who a lot of people think is a dog, but who is definitely not. He's a hyper-intelligent, otherworldly creature who's very good at knitting and can read 5 complex novels in a day.
So you're letting it linger. You're letting it brood as you write another novel. When you decide it's time to write your third novel, well, I guess the question is, how do you know you're ready? What are you doing with that idea while it's brooding to work yourself into a point where you know you can start?
Well, because I just felt like, I've done enough now. I've done enough work on it in my head, enough walks. I also, I know a lot about, I suppose, buying and selling used records, because I'm a bit of not a nerdy record collector, I wouldn't say, but a record accumulator. And I've got like 2,000 albums here at home, and I'm just always like around record fairs and record shops and things. But I actually kind of worked as a record dealer, like just set myself up as one for a few months just to know what it would feel like, just so I could speak with a bit more authority about it. So I had to do that first. But I think the primary thing was like, I had to have 1983 fully out of my system. It had to be done and dusted. The edit had to be done and dusted. And it's the same thing as always. If I'm not writing a book, I don't feel quite right. I've trained myself to be this person who's sort of only fully happy when I've got a story on the go of some kind. So as soon as 1983, the edit's in, the copy edit's in, I can draw the line. As soon as that line's drawn, then I'm like, okay, I can fully move on now. And around that time, which was 2 autumns ago, I went on a walk in the Blackdown Hills, and I saw a load of deer running towards a witchy tree, and I saw there were loads of holes in the hedge, and the first line popped into my head, and I went, that's it, that's perfect. Which the first line of the book is, the deer had been kicking the shit out of the hedgerows again. And I just went, yeah, that's it. Let's go from there.
When you've got that first line, how much do you like to know about the entire story that is to come? So who Carl is, the journey that they will go on together, perhaps even how it will end. What do you like to know before you start?
This is very difficult to describe because it's this intangible feeling. So it's kind of like I've told the whole story to myself in my head, but I haven't really told myself the small print. I've not ironed out the finer details. There's a lot of mystery to it. There's a lot of going into the unknown, which is really part of the joy of it for me. But I've got a very strong feeling about what it's going to be. It's like a flavour. The flavour's become very strong in my head over all the thinking and planning I've done. But then when I actually start, I'm really not that sure about technically where the story's going. And I think that's always going to be the case for me, because what you want, particularly like I think early in my career, certainly, I wanted someone to come along and say, it'll all be all right. Here's your ending. You know, you've definitely got an ending, but it doesn't work like that. You earn the ending with the hard work you do in the rest of it. And it's probably not gonna, if you write the kind of books I write, which a lot of people don't, a lot of people do it in a different way that works for them. And that's great. But if you write the kind of books I write in my sort of way, that ending's not going to become clear to you at the start. And this book was a really prime example of that, because it wasn't until I was really, really far into it that the ending came to me, and it was just there. It was like, oh my God, that's like, it's my absolute favorite final chapter of any book that I've written. And it just came to me out of nowhere.
I'll finish with you talk about books that you write, and I speak to a lot of authors. So many of them are more genre-based writers who know why they are writing in the genre they are in. For instance, they love puzzles, so they write murder mysteries, or they love love and they want to write uplit, whatever it is. Now, because of the nature of your career and writing very journalistic books with, you mentioned the book about golf, there's other sports ones knocking around in there, there's nature memoirs, you are writing stories almost regardless of where they sit on a shelf.
Oh, completely. Yeah. My genre is me. That's the only genre at work here.
Lastly, let's pick that apart then. What does a story need to be for you to want to write it, for it to qualify and fall in the genre of a Tom Cox novel?
Psychedelic. That's the prime aim, I suppose. And that's why I really like psychedelic music, and I've got a different definition of that to a lot of people. For me, psychedelic music it's a lot of different colours working together to make something that kind of expands or blows your mind slightly. That's my ambition, and that I want to do that in the same way that my favorite records from, say, 1968 do that. And the best compliment I ever had about one of my books, I think, was someone who came up to me after one of my talks and said, I've just finished this book. It was Villager, my first novel, and she said, It did my fucking head in, but in the best way. That's what I want readers to feel. And I'm a big reader of realism. I'm not a big reader of fantasy, but what I seem to want to do with my books is write things as if you'd be writing a novel that was realism, but have some slightly mysterious, fantastical element in there, but almost seems a bit mundane. It's just part of, like, there's a woman in Everything Will Swallow You who casually levitates, but it's not a big deal. It's just part of everyday life. It's just, I want to write it in that kind of way.
And that is it for Tom Cox on this week's episode of Writer's Routine. I think there was a lot in there. That new novel is Everything Will Swallow You. If you'd like to get a copy, use the link in the episode notes that takes you onto our bookshop.org page. That way a bit goes to us, a bit to Tom, and to your local independent bookshop as well. It means you don't need to go anywhere. You can support them, even if you never get a chance to actually go there. And I think that's a brilliant idea. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, it's the contact page at writersroutine.com. You can support us too on Patreon and Ko-Fi. Again, you can find the links wherever you're listening. And I will be back next week with a brand new guest on the podcast. Until then, thank you for listening.